Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about paradoxical ebullience, but first I'm going to start with my own background. When I was younger, I wanted to become an attorney, and I wanted to practice civil rights law. I was born in the 1960s, and I was inspired by the civil rights movement. Growing up in the 1970s, racism was still pretty evident, and I still wanted to become a civil rights attorney. After 4 years in the Navy in the 1980s, and then after earning my undergraduate degree from Fordham, I decided to attend paralegal school and work in law firms as a way to determine whether or not I really wanted to become an attorney. And in 1994, the Park Avenue law firm that I was working for took on a racial discrimination case. They represented the plaintiffs pro bono, and they won the case. At that time, I found myself looking at the idea of attending law school. But I was also disappointed to learn that in 1994, 30 years after the Civil Rights Act, things such as nooses, swastikas, and whites-only signs were being erected in the employment in the workspace of these plaintiffs. And even though the plaintiffs didn't have to pay for the case, it was still pretty expensive to litigate. And so my next thought was, gee, the people I want to represent are not going to be able to afford to pay me, and so I can't really do this for free. So some years later, I decided to attend policy school, and I attended the New School's Public and Urban Policy program at Milano, and I earned a PhD in Public and Urban Policy. And while I was at Milano, I focused on issues of racial inequality. And I'm here to tell you that we need to create some new narratives around economic inequality. And I'm also here to tell you that Black equality and socioeconomic progress will stagnate and reverse if Blacks' attitudes about their socioeconomic progress continue to run counter to their actual socioeconomic position. I have coined a term to describe this phenomenon, and it is called paradoxical ebullience. Paradoxical ebullience is simply a contradiction in the beliefs that Blacks hold about their socioeconomic position relative to what the economic data about well-being says. So in essence, Blacks are reporting that they are optimistic and they believe that they have achieved economic progress when in fact the indicators say that they have lost ground. And this is problematic. And the reason paradoxical ebullience is problematic is because attitudes that are inconsistent with outcomes disempowers collective action focused on addressing what the problem is. And in 2010, the Pew Charitable Trust contextualized this nicely. They reported on a 25-year trend in Black optimism, and they noted a spike in that optimism that coincided with the election of Barack Obama, despite a deep recession and a jobless recovery that impacted Blacks especially hard. In 2015, The Atlantic reported that 43% of Blacks perceive the American dream to be alive and well. That's about half of the Black population. In that same year, the Brookings Institute also reported on Black optimism, and what they found was that the poorest of Blacks were the most optimistic. Their take was that optimism was surprising. Again, not only is that optimism surprising, it's detrimental. And so what has happened? Well, attitudes, narratives, colorblind narratives, they have influenced attitudes away from self-help and collective action toward a more enhanced neoliberal individualism and personal responsibility. And those colorblind narratives essentially say hard work alone leads to the American dream. And those colorblind narratives also allow those who have achieved some level of success to blame those who haven't and accuse them of not working hard enough. And then those colorblind narratives convince us to conclude that those who haven't achieved success are not so much a challenge that needs a socioeconomic policy intervention as much as they are the cause of their own disparity. I challenge those narratives, and I call on you to do the same. To the extent that any of us in this room has achieved any level of success, I bet that success did come as part of your hard work, but it wasn't your hard work alone. You had people who helped you, and that is what collective action is. And so, the reality is, Black people are working hard. But not only are they working hard, they are earning degrees in record numbers, yet there remains a persistent 2-to-1 racial unemployment gap. Blacks are among some of the most frugal of people, yet for every dollar of wealth a white person has, Blacks only have 6 cents. And what is so disturbing is that despite the socioeconomic indicators of well-being, Blacks are reporting that they are making progress and that they are optimistic about their future. So this leads me to ask, do Blacks not know what the data says? Do they not believe it? Do they believe something else? Are they optimistic despite knowing the data? And more importantly, what is to be done about the effect of paradoxical ebullience? And so my thesis holds that we are seeing a shift in Black attitudes about socioeconomic goal attainments that can be attributed to shifting social narratives. And so therefore, we need to counter-storytell. Counter-storytelling is a tool that should be effective to overcome resistance to collective action. Counter-storytelling is a tool or a strategy that can also overcome colorblind narratives by reclaiming the voices of the disenfranchised. The legal system will tell its own narrative about the experience of race, and that narrative, more often than not, contradicts the lived experiences of racial minorities. Therefore, it is important for Blacks to start telling their own story. The extent to which Blacks share in the available economic, social, and political resources remains disproportionately low relative to their numbers in the general population. And so again, Blacks need to start telling their story. In his own narrative, A Realistic Look at Race, Dr. King cautioned Blacks against being excessively optimistic. He said that it would lead to complacency. He warned them that excessive optimism would lead them to believe that collective action is no longer necessary to achieve socioeconomic outcomes. And so I cannot stress enough the need to tell new narratives, and Blacks need to recognize that they need to do this. And so again, because we are losing ground if we do not reclaim our narrative and carry it forward, we will find ourselves back in time where all economic progress that we have achieved totally wiped out. And so what I want to leave you with is this. We need to create new narratives. Very important. As a society, no person stands on their own. We all stand on the shoulders of one another. We need to overcome the colorblind narrative that says hard work alone leads to the American dream. And I want to thank you for listening. And let's go out and create some new narratives. Thank you.